Hello everyone, my name is Mr.Khổng. Today, we are going to explore one of the largest conflicts in human history. World War II. After the First World War ended in 1918, the global order, especially in Europe, underwent profound changes. The collapse of major empires such as Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and several other imperial powers led to a complete redrawing of the political map of Europe. To victorious nations, including Britain, France, the United States, Italy, and Japan, gained significant advantages in terms of economy, politics, and territorial influence. However, the harsh conditions imposed on the defeated countries, particularly Germany, created deep resentment and made the post-war peace extremely fragile and unstable. By 1929, the world faced another major crisis that began with the collapse of the American stock market. The Great Depression quickly spread across the globe, causing many economies to experience prolonged periods of decline. Industrial production slowed dramatically, international trade decreased, and millions of workers lost their jobs. After years of economic hardship, living conditions became extremely difficult for people in many countries. Unemployed workers struggled to survive, farmers lost their land, social unrest increased, and public confidence in traditional governments continued to decline, while countries such as Britain, France, and the United States chose economic and social reforms to overcome the crisis. Germany, Italy, and Japan took a different path by relying on military expansion. These nations pursued policies of territorial conquest and colonial expansion in order to seize resources, strengthen their economies, and restore their national power. In Europe, Italy became the first country to establish a fascist regime under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. The Italian fascist government promoted extreme nationalism, built up a powerful military, and pursued ambitions of territorial expansion. Later, in Germany, economic collapse, severe inflation, and widespread dissatisfaction after World War I created favorable conditions for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to rise to power. Hitler promised to restore Germany's former status, establish a totalitarian fascist state, and begin a massive program of militarization. In Asia, Japan was also severely affected by the economic crisis. With limited natural resources, Japanese military leaders believed that the only way to develop the nation was through expansion and war. They sought to seize resource-rich territories across Asia and the Pacific region. Japan began carrying out aggressive campaigns aimed at gaining control over areas that had previously been under the influence of Britain, France, the United States, and the Netherlands, recognizing that they shared similar goals of territorial expansion and opposition to Western powers. Germany, Italy, and Japan gradually formed closer ties. All three nations promoted extreme nationalist ideologies, viewed themselves as superior powers, and considered opposing countries to be enemies. This cooperation eventually created the Axis alliance between Germany, Italy, and Japan, a military bloc that sought to reshape the world order through war. In 1931, the Japanese army launched an invasion of Manchuria, a region in northeastern China. Japan quickly occupied the area and established the puppet state of Manchukuo. However, Japan's ambitions did not stop there. By 1937, Japan expanded its aggression into a full-scale war against China, marking a major escalation of conflict in Asia. With a strategy of rapid offensives, the use of powerful military forces, and close coordination between different branches of the armed forces, the Japanese army quickly captured many important cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing. Facing the pressure of the Japanese invasion, the Chinese government, under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, decided to retreat to Chongqing, establishing a long-term resistance base in order to continue the war against Japan. The expansionist actions of Germany, Italy, and Japan during the 1930s made the international situation increasingly tense, directly laying the groundwork for the outbreak of World War II in 1939. After coming to power in Germany, Adolf Hitler gradually dismantled the military restrictions imposed on Germany after World War I, while rapidly rebuilding the nation's armed forces. For many years, Britain and France were aware of these actions, but continued to pursue a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid another major war in Europe. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria into its territory with almost no significant opposition from the international community. Soon afterward, Hitler pressured Czechoslovakia into surrendering the Sudetenland, a region with a large ethnic German population. These consecutive successes made the Nazi government increasingly confident in pursuing its ambitions for territorial expansion. To prepare for his next move, Hitler unexpectedly signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin. In August 1939, under a secret agreement between the two sides, Poland would be divided into two separate spheres of influence. On September 1, 1939, German forces launched an invasion of Poland from the west, while Soviet troops entered eastern Poland shortly afterward. In response to this act of aggression, Britain and France declare war on Germany, officially marking the beginning of World War II. Although they declare war on Germany, British and French forces initially carried out almost no major military operations to support Poland. Most of their troops remained on the defensive along Germany's western border. Meanwhile, the Polish army was forced to fight while being attacked from two directions and was quickly defeated by the overwhelming strength of the combined German and Soviet forces. After Poland was defeated, the war continued to spread. The Soviet Union launched an invasion of Finland in late 1939, beginning the Soviet-Finnish War. During the same period, Germany occupied Denmark and Norway in order to gain control of strategic routes in Northern Europe. Britain and France sent troops to assist Norway, but they were unable to stop the German advance and eventually had to withdraw. In May 1940, Nazi Germany launched a massive offensive against Western Europe. Instead of directly confronting France's heavily fortified defensive system, as it had done during World War I, Germany adopted a new strategy known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning warfare. German forces launched a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, an area considered difficult to penetrate, and quickly broke through the Allied defensive lines. Through the coordinated use of tanks, air power, and mechanized infantry, the German military managed to split the British and French forces, destroying a significant portion of France's elite troops. Hundreds of thousands of British and Allied soldiers were trapped in the city of Dunkirk, but they were successfully evacuated across the English Channel in a massive rescue operation. Following its victory in Western Europe, Germany continued to expand its control. Within only a few weeks, German forces defeated France, occupied the northern part of the country, and established the pro-German Vichy government in the south. This was a military achievement that Germany had failed to accomplish during World War I, when France had managed to hold on to Paris and prevent its complete defeat. Afterward, Hitler shifted his attention toward Great Britain. Germany launched a two-pronged campaign designed to force Britain into surrender. In the Atlantic Ocean, German U-boats carried out submarine warfare against British supply convoys, attempting to cut off essential resources such as food, fuel, and raw materials from overseas. These attacks caused severe damage to the British economy, but they were still not enough to bring the country to collapse. At the same time, the Battle of Britain took place in the skies over Britain in 1940. The German Luftwaffe launched continuous bombing campaigns aimed at destroying the Royal Air Force and major British cities, especially London. However, the Royal Air Force fought back fiercely and inflicted heavy losses on German aircraft. After months of intense air combat, Germany was forced to abandon its planned invasion of Britain, marking the first major failure in Hitler's attempt to expand the war. As part of efforts to strengthen the Axis alliance, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact in Berlin in September 1940, officially establishing a military alliance among the three nations. After that, Germany continued expanding its influence across Europe by persuading or forcing many countries in Eastern and Southern Europe to become dependent allies. Countries such as Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria gradually joined the Axis powers, while German forces invaded and occupied Yugoslavia and Greece in 1941. By the summer of 1941, Nazi Germany controlled most of the European continent and had become the dominant military power in the region. However, this rapid expansion also created greater challenges for Germany, managing a vast occupied territory, maintaining wars on multiple fronts, and continuing its pursuit of domination placed enormous pressure on the German war machine. These factors would later contribute to some of Germany's most serious defeats during the later stages of the conflict. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany unexpectedly broke the non-aggression pact it had signed with the Soviet Union and launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion aimed at conquering Soviet territory. More than 5.5 million German soldiers, supported by Allied forces, crossed the western border of the Soviet Union in a coordinated offensive, opening one of the bloodiest and most brutal fronts of World War II. During the early stages of the war, the German military held significant advantages in manpower, weaponry, mechanized equipment, and combat experience gained from its previous rapid victories across Europe. Through the use of Blitzkrieg tactics, German forces continuously advanced deep into Soviet territory, inflicting heavy losses on the Red Army. However, despite the fact that many Soviet units were surrounded and suffered severe casualties, they continued to fight back fiercely with strong determination, slowing the advance of the invading forces. By October 1941, Germany had concentrated a large number of troops to launch Operation Typhoon, with the direct objective of capturing Moscow, the Soviet capital. Hitler believed that seizing this important political center would force the Soviet Union to collapse quickly. Facing a critical situation, the Soviet Defense Council, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, decided to remain in Moscow and personally direct the defense of the capital. However, as the harsh winter arrived, the German army began to face increasing difficulties due to freezing temperatures, inadequate equipment, and the growing resistance of the Red Army. Starting in December 1941, Soviet forces launched a major counteroffensive, pushing German troops back from the outskirts of Moscow. The defeat at the Battle of Moscow marked the failure of the Blitzkrieg strategy that Hitler had previously used to achieve rapid victories in many European countries. After the setback at Moscow, Germany shifted its focus of attack toward the southern regions of the Soviet Union in an attempt to seize resource-rich territories, especially areas that supplied food and oil. One of the most important objectives of the German military was the city of Leningrad. There, the fighting became extremely intense and continued for many months. Despite being under a severe siege, the people and defenders of Leningrad maintained their resistance with remarkable determination, preventing Germany from capturing the city quickly, while the Soviet-German front became increasingly intense. In North Africa, Italian forces launched an invasion of Egypt in September 1940 with the goal of expanding their influence in the region. However, the North African campaign soon developed into a prolonged struggle between the Axis powers and the Allied forces. By October 1942, the British-American forces achieved a crucial victory, regained the initiative, and began a powerful counteroffensive that gradually pushed back the fascist forces in the region. At the same time that the war was spreading across Europe, Japan was also intensifying its expansionist policies in Asia. Earlier, Japan had gradually expanded its control over many areas of eastern China. By September 1940, Japan occupied French Indochina in an effort to cut off supply routes from Western countries to China while strengthening its strategic position in Southeast Asia. Japan later established the concept of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, claiming that it sought to help Asian nations free themselves from the rule of Western colonial powers. In reality, however, this was a strategy designed to conceal Japan's imperial ambitions and its goal of expanding control over the region's resources. The United States at that time still maintained a position of neutrality, but it increasingly expressed strong opposition to the military actions of the Axis powers. The U.S. government imposed economic sanctions, including restrictions on the supply of oil, steel, and other essential raw materials to Japan. Facing growing economic pressure, Japan decided to launch a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Following this event, Japan rapidly expanded the war throughout the Asia-Pacific region. The Japanese military launched a series of large-scale campaigns aimed at eliminating Western influence from Southeast Asia. Within a short period of time, Japan successively occupied many strategically important territories, including Thailand, Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, Burma, Indonesia, and numerous key islands across the Pacific. The simultaneous offensives carried out by Germany in Europe and Japan in Asia transformed World War II into a truly global conflict, with battlefields stretching from Europe and North Africa to the Asia-Pacific region. By 1942, Imperial Japan had expanded its control over a vast territory of approximately 8 million square kilometers, covering large areas of East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific region, with a population of nearly 500 million people living under its rule. In the occupied territories, civilians were forced to endure harsh policies of exploitation, oppression, and brutal military control imposed by the Japanese army. Countries such as China, Korea, and Vietnam suffered devastating consequences from the war. Among the many atrocities committed, hundreds of thousands of women in Japanese-occupied territories were forced into becoming comfort women, a form of sexual slavery intended to serve Japanese soldiers. In Europe, Nazi Germany also carried out extremely brutal policies of persecution and repression. The Nazi regime established a vast network of concentration camps to imprison and exterminate groups of people considered enemies or undesirable according to its ideology. The victims included prisoners of war, political opponents, Jewish people, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and many other communities. Among these crimes, the Holocaust, the genocide against the Jewish people, was one of the most horrific atrocities in human history, resulting in the murder of approximately 6 million Jews, along with millions of other victims during the period of Nazi rule. The expansion and aggressive actions of the Axis powers forced nations around the world to unite in order to confront this common threat. In response to the situation, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, despite their major political differences, cooperated to form an anti-fascist alliance. On January 1, 1942, in Washington, D.C., representatives of 26 countries, including the three major Allied powers, the Soviet Union, the United States, and Britain, signed the Declaration by United Nations. The participating nations pledged to mobilize all of their military, economic, and political resources to continue the fight until fascism was completely defeated. A major turning point of the war occurred on the Eastern Front during the Battle of Stalingrad, which lasted from November 1940 to February 1943. In this fierce battle, the Soviet Red Army launched a large-scale counteroffensive, encircling and cutting off Nazi German forces in the city of Stalingrad. As a result, Soviet forces destroyed and captured approximately 330,000 German soldiers and their allied troops. The devastating defeat at Stalingrad severely weakened Nazi Germany's military power and marked the moment when the course of the war began to shift in favor of the Allies. After the victory at Stalingrad, the Soviet Red Army continued to launch large-scale counteroffensives, pushing German forces back across multiple fronts. During the Battle of Kursk in 1943, the Soviet Union defeated one of the last major German offensives, destroying dozens of enemy divisions and inflicting severe losses on the Nazi forces. Considered the largest tank battle in history, the Battle of Kursk played a crucial role in strengthening the Soviet Union's strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. By early 1944, the Red Army continued to achieve a series of important victories. From January to February 1944, Soviet forces launched the Leningrad offensive, ending the nearly 900-day German siege of the city. After years of enduring constant bombardment, starvation, freezing conditions, and enormous suffering, the people of Leningrad were finally liberated from the encirclement. This victory carried not only great military significance, but also became a powerful symbol of the Soviet people's determination and resilience in their struggle against fascism. In North Africa, Allied forces, including Britain, the United States, and their partner forces, gradually defeated the German-Italian Axis armies, forcing them to withdraw from this strategically important region. Following their victory in North Africa, the Allies expanded their campaign into Europe with the invasion of the Italian island of Sicily in July 1943. The operation quickly succeeded, creating a severe political crisis within Italy. Under increasing pressure from the Allied advance and facing a worsening military situation, Benito Mussolini's fascist government collapsed. The new Italian government began negotiations and eventually signed an armistice agreement with the Allied powers. However, Nazi Germany refused to allow Italy to leave the war so easily. German forces immediately intervened, deploying large numbers of troops to halt the Allied advance and maintain control over the Italian peninsula. On September 12, 1943, Mussolini was rescued from captivity by a German Special Operations Unit and was later installed as the leader of a German-backed puppet government. More than 30 German divisions were sent to Italy to strengthen defensive positions. Due to fierce German resistance, Allied forces faced extremely difficult battles in the mountainous regions of central Italy, and the Italian campaign continued until the final days of the war. In the Pacific region, A major turning point occurred in June 1942 during the Battle of Midway, when the United States Navy and Air Forces confronted Japan. As a result, Japan suffered a devastating defeat, losing several of its major aircraft carriers along with many highly experienced naval aviators. The battle is considered one of the most decisive engagements of the war because it significantly weakened Japan's offensive capabilities and allowed the United States to regain the strategic initiative in the Pacific War. From August 1940 to early 1943, American forces continued launching offensive operations against Japan, most notably the Guadalcanal campaign. After months of fierce fighting, the United States achieved victory and began shifting from a defensive posture to a broader counteroffensive strategy across the Pacific. Allied forces gradually recaptured numerous strategically important islands, moving step by step closer to the Japanese homeland. Entering 1944, the Soviet Red Army launched a series of large-scale counteroffensive operations on the Eastern Front. Through a succession of powerful attacks, the Soviet forces pushed the German army out of Soviet territory and advanced into Eastern Europe. These victories severely weakened Nazi Germany's defensive system and brought the Red Army close to the German border by the summer of 1944. Also, in 1944, the United States, Britain, and the Allied nations opened a second front in Western Europe with the historic Normandy landings on the coast of northern France on June 6. Although German forces resisted fiercely, the Allies gradually broke through enemy defenses and advanced deeper into French territory. After liberating Paris, Allied forces continued their advance to free several Western European countries, including Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, while preparing for a direct offensive against Germany. Before the war came to an end, the Yalta Conference between the three major powers, the Soviet Union, the United States, and Britain, was held in February 1945. The leaders discussed plans for defeating Nazi Germany, reorganizing Europe after the war, and determining spheres of influence among the victorious nations. Beginning in January 1945, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive offensive against Germany from the east. More than 1 million German soldiers were mobilized to defend the capital city of Berlin, but they were unable to stop the overwhelming advance of Soviet forces. On April 30, 1945, Soviet troops raised the red flag over the roof of the German Reichstag building, symbolizing the near-total collapse of the Nazi regime. During the final moments of the war, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker in Berlin after realizing that defeat was inevitable. On May 9, 1945, Nazi Germany officially signed the document of unconditional surrender, bringing the war in Europe to an end. However, the conflict in the Asia-Pacific region continued. Beginning in 1944, the US-British Allied forces intensified their military campaigns in Asia, including operations to capture Burma and the Philippine Islands in order to cut off Japan's supply lines. At the same time, China launched numerous military campaigns against Japanese forces, working alongside the broader Allied effort to gradually weaken Japan's military strength on the battlefield. During the final stage of the Pacific War, the island of Okinawa became the last major objective on the path toward an invasion of the Japanese homeland. It was one of the bloodiest and most intense battles of World War II. The Japanese military, determined to fight to the very end, organized a fierce defensive campaign that caused heavy casualties among Allied forces. However, after nearly 3 months of brutal fighting, Okinawa eventually fell to American forces, opening the way for a direct advance toward the Japanese mainland. After the victory at Okinawa, Allied leaders faced an extremely difficult decision. They could launch a massive invasion on Japan's main islands, but such an operation was expected to result in enormous casualties on both sides. The second option was to find a way to force Japan to surrender without having to begin another devastating military campaign. In July 1945, the United States successfully conducted the first nuclear weapons test in history, marking a major turning point in modern warfare. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb, codenamed Little Ba, on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion caused catastrophic destruction, killing tens of thousands of people instantly, while many others later died from the effects of radiation exposure. Just 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb, known as Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. The city was almost completely destroyed, and tens of thousands of people lost their lives. leaving devastating consequences for the Japanese population, facing a situation in which continuing the war was no longer possible. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito of Japan announced Japan's acceptance of unconditional surrender to the Allied powers. This event marked the end of World War II, the largest and deadliest conflict in human history. World War II ended with the complete defeat of the Axis powers, including Germany, Italy, and Japan. Victory belonged to the Allied powers, with the three most influential nations being the Soviet Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Their military efforts, economic strength, and vast resources played a decisive role in reshaping the global balance of power. However, the price humanity paid after the war was devastating. More than 70 countries were drawn into the conflict, and billions of people were affected either directly or indirectly. Approximately 60 million people lost their lives, while tens of millions more were injured or left homeless. Numerous cities, rural areas, factories, roads, and economic infrastructures were severely damaged or completely destroyed. It is widely regarded as the largest scale and most destructive war ever experienced by humanity. After 1945, the world entered a period of profound transformation. The United Nations was established with the goal of maintaining international peace, preventing future large-scale wars, and creating a new global order. However, ideological differences and conflicting interests between the Soviet Union and the United States soon led to new tensions. The two nations, which had once been wartime allies, gradually shifted toward rivalry and confrontation in many areas, including politics, military affairs, economics, and global influence. This competition marked the beginning of a new historical era known as the Cold War, which lasted for several decades and shaped international relations throughout the second half of the 20th century. Thank you all for watching this video. Please share your thoughts and opinions about these historical events in the comment section below. If you found this content informative and useful, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future fascinating historical topics. See you again. Top of form.